KPFK. I'm Melody King, a longtime animal advocate and founder of Los Feliz Animal Rescue. I am an independent animal rescuer in the Los Angeles area. I've been involved with animal issues for many years, and this show is going to talk about all sorts of animal issues, from spay-neuter to how to choose your pet. Each week, I'll have a guest on the show to discuss one particular animal-related issue. This week, I'm talking with actor and animal advocate Tom Kiesche, who has spent thousands of hours volunteering in the LA city shelters and has been around to many, many other county and state shelters and has a lot of experience. And we'll be discussing the current state of the Los Angeles city shelters. So I'd like to welcome Tom. How are you?
Good. Doing great. Thank you for having me on the show, and congratulations on the show. I've been an actor for 30 years. I've had a Screen Actors Guild card for that amount of time. I have made a living in commercials and television. I guess the biggest role on TV was Breaking Bad for 4 episodes, a couple feature films, a couple of my own. I have written for film. I've written books. I've sung. And I started volunteering with animals just because I found that waiting around for an audition was no existence. And it gave me a purpose and a reason. And I just love it. Plus, there's nothing that teaches you more about being a human than a love for animals.
Thank you for coming.
Certainly.
So when we're talking about the LA city shelters, which I don't know if people understand is a little bit different from the LA county shelters. So even some of the cities that you think of as being Los Angeles cities, like West Hollywood or Sherman Oaks, those are actually county shelter areas. Now, you've been in both. Can you give us just sort of a brief overview of what the city shelter issue is at the moment?
Sure. So I do volunteer for both the City of Los Angeles shelter system and the County of Los Angeles shelter system, as well as Ventura County shelter system. And a lot of the issues that one face, they all seem to face. A lot of that is overpopulation of almost all types of animals at this time. And a big reason is because of the non-spay and neutering that wasn't happening during the COVID issues.
Now, why weren't they doing spay and neuter during COVID?
So there was spay and neutering being done. It was not being done at the extent that it needed to be done. So there was a few things that happened. A number of veterinarians who were older decided it was time to get out of the business and retire. A number of veterinarians decided to move out of town because of a lot of other people moving out of town as well, expenses and things like that. And then you had this explosion of people taking in animals into their homes that don't normally have animals, but they wanted a project during COVID, and they weren't getting those dogs spay or neutered because of some of those other issues. And then accidents happen, and puppy dog has more puppies.
Or kitty cat
has more kittens.
Yep. And as a rescuer who is more familiar with the cat scene, I know that there was a lawsuit about 10 years ago that kept the city from doing TNR, or what we call trap, neuter, return. And that has led to an extreme overpopulation of cats in Los Angeles as well. So basically we're having a crisis across the board.
Yes, we are smack dab in the middle. And before we go any further, I should say that I am speaking as an individual, not as a representative of any municipal shelter system, but speaking in my own individual capacity.
Perfect. Very, very legally well done.
Thank you.
So I know one of the causes we talked about is spay-neuter. There's a lot of people seem to be returning their pets. Can you talk a little bit about why that might be going on?
Sure. That is true. There's a lot of animals being surrendered, probably at a higher rate than normal. And I don't know the actual reasons for this. I mean, there are different reasons that were given. One big one is that some landlords have changed the rules of the residents, and they're not allowed to have dogs anymore, or they're not allowed to have specific breeds anymore. There's also the fact that we're sort of in a disposable society, that everyone sort of expects that when they get a pet, it's going to be like a brand new phone or television and perfect out of a box. and that they don't need to put in any time or training into that animal. And when anything goes wrong, they just return it, out of sight, out of mind. So I think those two things are big reasons why the surrendering numbers have gone up. And the third one, which is not a popular thing to talk about, honestly, and it may kick up some dust, but there's this whole thing known as no-kill. And everyone thinks that all the shelters are no-kill shelters because that was politically positive or popular to say. And although no-kill never meant no-kill, it just meant that a certain percentage of animals got out and, there was an acceptable percentage of animals that were being euthanized. That perception got into people's brains and they thought, oh, I'll just give up my animal. And people would literally show up at the shelters at times and say, I want to donate my dog or donate my cat. And the mindset was that they were becoming rehoming centers, that there was no ramifications or danger to the animal, or no animals were being put down because it was quote unquote no kill. So I think that was also a reason why the surrendering numbers went through the roof. And so now, personally, I guess I'm an advocate. Sometimes it's kind of funny. I'm always weird about that word because I always thought of advocates in a certain way, but I just love dogs and animals. But
you're an advocate.
I guess I'm an advocate. But I think it's really important to be transparent and let people know that animals, the shelter systems and the staff are doing the best they can or the best they know how. But that doesn't mean the animals are safe and are guaranteed to have happy, stress-free existences inside the concrete and steel kennels that they live in.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about no-kill, and that's probably a topic that needs to get in depth another time.
100%.
But it is really interesting how everyone wants to be no-kill in theory, but when you put it into practice, it can become very difficult. And we know we're not no-kill. I believe the latest wolf report is what LA Animal Services puts out monthly on their euthanasia statistics. And I believe the one from July, there were already about 600 dogs that have been put down this year alone. So we're definitely not even close to no-kill. And I did want to mention one thing about the housing and the landlords. I know in the county, there were some provisions where tenants couldn't be evicted because they had an unauthorized animal. And in the county, that has expired. But in Los Angeles City, that's still in effect until January 2024. So if you're in LA City proper and your landlord is telling you that you can be evicted for your animal, definitely consult with a tenants' rights attorney or a tenants union or Stay Housed LA or someone like that, because you may be able to keep your pet. I know a lot of rescues, even including mine, would rather try and help and give people money and give them the support if they need pet security deposits to keep the animal there than have them go into the shelter system, because it's actually more cost effective to do that.
So I want to flip the microphone here for a second. And since it's your first show and the people listening don't necessarily know, tell me and tell them.
I'll do a better intro later.
No, tell them why you know so much about local city government.
So in addition to running my own small local rescue, Los Feliz Animal Rescue, I got involved in local politics over the pandemic because I couldn't take watching the national news anymore. And I've currently joined the Los Feliz Neighborhood Council, and I'm also on the governing board of the Los Feliz Improvement Association. And I should probably give the same legal disclaimer that you did, that none of my opinions are reflective of anybody else other than myself.
Perfect.
Is that how I'm supposed to say it?
Yeah, I would say speaking in my own individual capacity. I'm speaking
in my own individual capacity. So there you go. So one of the things you've mentioned to me also is people pick the wrong pet, or they don't think about the pet's needs. People that, we have a lot of certain types of breeds in the shelter, German Shepherds, huskies, pit bulls, of course. But I was really amazed at how many beautiful huskies are in the shelter system.
Yeah. So Melody asked me quite a number of years ago at this point to write a article about what people should look for in pets for her rescue, and she put it on her website. And I think how I spun that article was it's not only what you want, but what's right for your particular animal. And so when I first started volunteering at shelters, there were predominantly pit bulls. It was probably, these are all inaccurate numbers, but let's say 80% pit bulls. And recently in the county and the city, it's probably 30% pit bulls and 30% huskies and 30% shepherds and 10% other. And those numbers are off, obviously, but it's a lot more shepherds and huskies. And the shepherds and the huskies are such working breeds. And even though I love those breeds myself, and a lot of people love them, they're not for everybody. They require a lot of work and discipline and rules and structure and exercise. And even though that husky or that shepherd might be a beautiful, cute puppy, if it's not trained correctly, or it's worse, trained incorrectly, and you teach the dog to be mouthy because of the way you play with it, and you teach it to play rough because you like rough playing with it when it's a puppy, when that shepherd gets to be 70 pounds, it presents problems for most people. And then it comes to shelters, and then people like me who are volunteering have to basically work with those dogs in the shelters and show that it's not the dog that's mouthy, it was the way they were trained. So, get the animal that not only you want for the pictures, but the animal that you are right for, and that is your circumstances and your abilities.
It needs to be a good fit.
Needs to be a good fit on both sides.
I'm Melody King, and you're listening to the Animal Agenda on KPFK. Today, my guest is actor and animal advocate Tom Kiesche, and we're discussing the current state of the Los Angeles city shelters. Okay, so talking about the different shelters a little bit, we talked about why the city shelters and the county shelters are different. But why do some of the city shelters seem to run a bit differently or have different procedures?
So honestly, that's kind of borderline things I can't talk about. And it's only opinion, obviously. But they're not set up to run differently. Mayor Bass appoints a commission of 5 commissioners, and she hires a general manager, and the general manager hires the rest of the people below her, and so on and so forth all the way down. And they're supposed to operate all under the same umbrella of rules. Now, why they don't operate all under the same umbrella of rules, in some people's opinions, let's put it that way for legal purposes, I don't know, honestly. As a volunteer, I can tell you it's a little bit frustrating to go into one shelter and find that there are some rules that are slightly different than another shelter that you volunteered at the week earlier. The county and the city are completely different systems run by completely different management and different executives, so that makes complete sense. But the reasons why each shelter operates slightly differently, that has never made sense to me, quite honestly.
And we do have a new general manager for LA Animal Services.
Yeah. Mayor Bass hired Stacey Daines, Stayceedains, and she's been on the job for, I think, about 2 months. Personally, I think that she's trying to do a good job, or doing a good job, or at least open to doing a good job. She has met with the volunteers several times and allowed us to give suggestions. She's done that with staff. I believe she's done that with rescues. She's taking a lot of input in. I have seen her attempt to make changes, and some changes are in process of being changed, and some are probably stuck somewhere in the idea and trying to implement. But again, that would probably be something you would want to talk to her about.
I know there's a lot of bureaucracy doing anything at the city level to get through.
It seems like a very, very big ocean liner, and it's hard to turn that thing. So,
yeah. Well, we wish her the best of luck and hope
100%. Animals' lives are depending on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So since you've visited all these different shelters, what do you think are some of the good things that changes that have been made, or what are things that we could take from other shelter systems you've seen and potentially implement?
Sure.
What are your recommendations?
Yeah. So one thing I love doing when I go out of town, either for work as an actor or just vacation, is if I have time, I tend to drop in an animal shelter. And if I can get a tour from somebody or meet animals through a volunteer or a staff member, I love doing that because I love seeing what they do well and what other systems that I volunteer with do well. Because one thing I believe in, and something I used to volunteer at the LA Zoo, and zoologists are amazing. First off, they're highly trained, and they're all super intelligent and intellectually curious. They spend their time trying to figure out how to do things better. And they go to conferences, and if they have questions, they call up other zoos. And I was building and designing basically giant cat toys for all different animals. I was in the enrichment department. And I was encouraged as a volunteer to research other zoos and projects and puzzles that they had built, and either build the puzzles they've already built or contact them to find out how to build different puzzles, or come up with my own and bounce it off of other people. And the shelter systems, in my experience, don't necessarily do that. And so I have brought that over from my mindset at the LA Zoo and my own intellectual curiosity. So I went to Palm Springs, and when I went out there, I found out that the volunteer organization took over the municipal shelter a number of years ago. You can read it on their website. I think it was 2012. And they decided to do things differently. And one thing that they did really well that I liked was they came up with a leveling system of their handlers and their animals, so that when people took their dogs out on walks, the handlers weren't overmatched by the animals. So you weren't giving too challenging of a dog to too inexperienced of a handler, so there weren't issues coming up that might happen. So I told my fellow volunteers at the shelter I was working at, and we sort of came up with the idea, mutated it for our own shelter to keep our own volunteers safe. So I love that. Ventura County, I volunteer up there, and they have a color coding system instead of a number system, and they label behaviors. So each behavior has a color, and so you know what behavior you're going to have to deal with each particular dog that you're going to walk.
What's the difference between that and what LA does?
So
I know you mentioned before a numbering system.
Yeah, so the numbering system that we did at the shelter I volunteered at was basically unofficial. And then LA City created its own numbering system, which took our 5 levels and knocked it down to 3 levels. And their first level was only small dogs under 30 pounds. And I might be getting some of these numbers wrong, but I think that's what it was. And so really big dogs were only 2 levels. And that was either they had a behavior mark or they didn't have a behavior mark. Whereas the leveling system that Palm Springs had, if I remember correctly, and what we were doing at the shelter I was volunteering at, was 5 levels for big dogs. And so the dog you would let your grandmother walk was a 1, and the dog you would only let someone with very, very high experience was a level 3. And why that was level 5 was we had a level 1, 1 plus, 2, 2 plus, and 3, which is 5 levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it was basically the same as Palm Springs, except we combined it down to 3 levels.
And it sounds like in the other place you were specifying the specific behaviors rather than just a number, and that could be more helpful for people to see if that particular behavior had decreased or increased.
Yeah, so we are currently talking, the volunteers, with Stacey Daines about restructuring the leveling systems. And so that's one of the discussions we're having is in my opinion, it's more helpful to label the behavior and easier to identify the behavior for anybody than it is to just arbitrarily give a number. Because what does a number mean other than it's a level? But pulling is pulling, jumping is jumping, and being mouthy is being mouthy. So it's really easy to identify, and it's really easy to agree upon. And then some days, even though I might be a high-level volunteer, some days I just don't want to deal with a jumpy dog. Because, for whatever reason, or I don't want to deal with a mouthy dog. So that's why I like the naming the behavior. And Agora Hills is a county shelter, and they have a leveling system that's based on behavior labeling. Ventura has a labeling system based on behavior. And those are the two that I know that do that.
I'm Melody King, and you're listening to The Animal Agenda on KPFK. My guest today is actor and animal advocate Tom Kiesche, and we're discussing the current state of the Los Angeles city shelters. Now, I know you don't walk a lot of cats.
I don't walk a lot of cats, but I do own a cat.
Yes.
Yes.
You need to own more than one. You shouldn't have just one. But so I notice with cats tend to get put into two piles. They are domestic or they are feral. And I personally don't like the term feral very much because just because a cat lives outside and acts scared and angry in a cage doesn't mean that it has not ever been domesticated, that it can't be domesticated, given it takes more work and maybe we don't have that kind of time. But I know a lot of times now the shelter or the animal services seems to not be pulling in dumped cats that were inside cats and been left on the street because they are considered free roaming / feral animals. I was just wondering if you saw anything related to that while you were in the shelters. Or
So I did a ride along with animal control for the county just this past week, which was fascinating. And unfortunately, we picked up a few dead animals on the side of the road, which is tragic and sad, and it's part of their job. But at one stop, someone asked if we could take the cats that were in their backyard. And by his rules that he was supposed to operate in, it wasn't his choice, it was his rules. If the cats were able to walk around and past a certain age, he was not allowed to take them. Unless they were young, and then he could take them because they needed help. Or if they had some sickness or injury, he could take them. But other than that, he wasn't, by code or law, whatever they operate under, he wasn't allowed to take them. So and that's the county, and it's constantly changing. And I don't work with cats, but you mentioned feral cats and good cats. And it's kind of funny to me because feral, and I'm not a cat expert, but in the system, it's almost like feral equals bad, which I don't agree.
Well, you just even said good cats and feral cats.
Well, that's right. That's what I'm saying. That's how it sort of gets broken down. You know, that cat doesn't behave. And they start calling it, it's not officially feral, but people refer to it as feral if it's not agreeable to their...
If it hisses or attacks.
It's all of a sudden labeled as feral.
A lot of times they do out of fear.
100%. Yep.
And you really can't, even when we have like a little mini shelter, or we have cats in a foster's home, we can't really predict what they're going to act like until they're in the environment that they go to, because there's just so many question marks up in the air. I just had an adopter take a kitten for his cat, and they are siblings, but they hadn't seen each other in a few weeks, and so now they smell different. And so one cat is attacking the other, and we have to separate them and all that stuff. But they're just really sensitive, and you can't predict that kind of behavior. And I can't imagine like this little kitten never being called feral because she has a tendency. She's a screamer, and she just has a tendency to, when something is not going her way or she's not getting her attention, she screams her little head off. But she's not feral at all. So yeah, I get frustrated by what I call the overuse of that term. There are feral cats.
Sure.
But, or non-domesticated cats. But I think there's a lot more that are just, and it really breaks my heart when they're dumped out on the street because they don't have any of the skills of an outdoor cat to go find their food, to know how to survive at all. They've had kibble given to them all their lives, so now they're just thrown out there.
Well, with the dogs, we also have, good dogs and bad dogs. Like, that's how they label, and it's like there's no such thing. It's like it's just a misunderstood dog or a dog that's scared or untrained or acting out of fear. It's, like, personally as a volunteer, I think my job, because again, I work with some challenging dogs, but is to learn them, to try to understand them, to have empathy and see things like how they may perceive things, and to try to understand them, to give them a chance.
Yeah. To
learn their story. And it's the shelter, as I alluded to earlier, I believe, it's a scary place. And
Sure.
we would react in different ways than we react in a radio studio, if we were stuck like in a situation comparable to they are. So that's what I sort of see as my job as a volunteer is compassion and understanding.
And the city needs a lot more volunteers, right? Because I know dogs were spending a lot of time not getting walked, so I'm assuming that we still need a great deal of volunteers.
Yep. So the city and the county both need more volunteers. There are some questions of why so many volunteers exit the system and why so many volunteers who have applied haven't been accepted. But hopefully the new management under Stacey Daines will look into that, and hopefully there'll be more retention, and hopefully it'll be a more pleasant place in the future where more people want to not only stay, but also to join. So I'm not going to kid anybody listening. Volunteering at a shelter is challenging on so many levels. And that's no matter whether you volunteer with dogs or cats or bunnies or turtles or chickens or whatever. It's a challenging place. Emotionally, physically, everything about it is challenging. But if you have the desire, it's so much better, in my opinion, to take action and be part of the solution than it is to sit on the sidelines and just complain.
And from my experience, I will say, even though it can be really hard, and I have not volunteered at a city shelter, but even though it can be really hard when you go and you see how happy they are to see you.
Yeah.
They're so thrilled, the animals, and it just totally makes it worth it, and you kind of forget how hard it can be. So Tom's also been working on a feature film to help animals in addition to everything else he's been doing, so I want to give him an opportunity to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So we're actively raising money for a project. Working title is For Mr. Goo, F-O-R, Mr. M-R, Goo, G-O-O, and it is a fictional feature film that hopefully will help people have a greater understanding of what animals may feel, and hopefully it creates a discussion and more empathy for animals in this world.
Yay, empathy.
Yay, empathy.
And so where can people follow you?
So you can check out my Instagram or my link tree, and it's my name, Tomkiesche. And you can just do a web search.
Sounds like the food, not spelled like it.
It sounds like the food, not spelled like it, exactly.
There you go.
If people are interested in volunteering for either the city or the county shelters or even a rescue, they should go to the website, either municipality or the private institution, and almost always there's a section that says volunteer or how to volunteer. Fill out an application, read the process, and then just press send.
And one thing I wanted to also mention is the city also has a foster at home program. So you can literally keep a dog from being in the shelter or a cat by just being a foster parent to that animal in your own home.
That's true. You can look that up on the website of either the county shelter or city shelter.
This is Melody King, and you've been listening to The Animal Agenda on KPFK. I've been talking with actor and animal advocate Tom Kiesche about the current state of the Los Angeles city shelters. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. If you're enjoying this and other programs on this station, please consider making a donation by going to kpfk.org or by calling 818-985-5735. That's 818-985-KPFK. If you have suggestions for topics and guests, please message me on the Animal Agenda page on Facebook. Special thanks to my producer, Marlena Bond, and thank you for listening. Please tune in again to the Animal Agenda next Wednesday at 2:30 p.m.